Good morning and welcome back to Plannercraft. I'm Natalie and I'm going to be taking you through the next stage of our project. So far we've created our cut elements. We've also then cut those out and applied the ink effects, or at least I will have by the time that you see this video. And I'm going to be also doing the rest of the design work today. So if we go back to our mock-up, you can see that we've got our rough layout, and there's a few bits and pieces that may change when we've actually got the pieces in front of us, but we'll see how it goes. So this morning I want to focus on the cup image. So you can see it's actually made up of two layers. We have our actual cup stamp with the flowers and a little sentiment I've placed over the top. Okay, so those are the two elements that we want to work with, and we want to work with them on an A4 sheet so that they're ready for printing and we know that they come through at the correct scale. So we're going to start a new document, and when we do that we're going to go to print, and if you've come up and it isn't showing the templates or the presets, just give it a little scroll and it will come back. Click on A4. So the DPI we want is 300 because we're going to be printing these, so it's important that they're at a reasonably high resolution so that we get some good quality print. It's going to be printed on a inkjet, so I'm going to change it to CMYK. So this means that the colours that we see should be more or less what we're going to get. And I'm going to change my settings, so whether I'm going to go for coated cardstock, so something like a photo paper, or uncoated like a normal inkjet or card. So I think I'm going to go for some photo paper for this time round. So let's go for that one. So there you go, we've got our coated cardstock selected. We've got our CMYK format correctly set up. So now we can carry on. Go create. And that's going to open up with an A4 document. So you can see that we haven't set up any bleeds because there's no point. We haven't set up margins. Again, just be aware of where your printed margins roughly are and keep away from those. And then we can just paste in our elements as we want to work on them. So going back to our mock-up, go across your layers palette and we're going to select the pixel layers ready to go. You're going to go Command and C or Control and C on a PC. We're going to go to our new document. We're going to paste those in. We're going to press Command Shift and S or Control Shift and S to do a save as. Okay, and we can call this our working print and cut. Okay. So we've got our elements together and they're in the right size. We just need to position them a bit better. So let's go and pop these back up in this corner. Allow some room for some registration marks to help you align your cut. And right now everything is made up of dots, which means that if we were to send it to the scan and cut at this moment, there's no information that the scan and cut can use. So one of the things that we're going to need to do is actually to create our cut path. We're also going to need to colour our image. So we're going to do that digitally rather than printing it out and colouring it in. But if you're not confident with doing digital colouring yet, don't feel that you can't do this project. Do print it out and colour it in by hand. And then you can always use your scan to cut. And then off you go from there. So if at any point during this session you have any questions, although this is a pre-recorded session, I will be watching live with you. So all you got to do is pop a question in the comments and I will try and help you. Okay? Do try and be nice and detailed about what you're asking the question about, just so I know where I'm going from there. So I'm going to start by creating my layers. So I know I need 3 layers. Our bottom layer is going to be print. And it does help if you actually label them. The next layer is going to be cut. So that's where your cut data is going to live. And finally, we have our registration layer that is going to be used for both print and cut, and that's the bit that's going to tie it all together. So they're quite important that you actually have these layers so you can switch them on and off easily. So as you do your print, you can turn off your cut, and when you export your cut file, you can turn off the print and you're not sending any image data that your machine can't read. So I'm going to put these two pixel layers into our print. So to do that, I'm just going to drag it. You can see that there's a blue line, but it stops short just underneath that preview picture, and that means it's going to drop it inside. So when I do that, it's going to drop it into that group. Okay, I've also done a bit of tidying up just around the outside, so if you want to just select it off the sheet, you can do. So it may be that your digital image has a transparent background, in which case you don't have to worry about that. But if it doesn't and it comes through as a white sheet, that's fine. You can just go around the outside and tidy up if need be. But for most uses, such as doing it onto here, it won't hurt. Excuse me. I'm not even going to edit that out. So I wanted to try and do this as real time as possible, but I'm aware that it's going to be a long one. So there may be sections that I get in to speed up a little bit in editing, but I'm hoping that we can kind of keep it as true to live as possible. But it just means that when there are questions, I can actually answer a little bit easier and a bit more fluid is the idea. So we'll see how we go. Okay, so if we go up into our top left corner, we actually have three personas in Affinity Designer. So the first one is our vectors, so that's how we create our paths for things like a cut layer. But the next one is dots, and you can see it's pixel persona. And you can see that our image layer is a pixel, so it stands to reason that if we want to edit those layers, we need to change the tools that we're using. So if we click on there, it's going to think about it, and you can see that our tools change down the left hand side and our studios change down the right. Okay, so everything we do while we're in this persona must stay in this layer. Okay, so if anything goes into one of the other two layers, you just need to pull it back to that print layer so that we know that it's keeping all that information together. We can add a new layer if we want to do some colouring without disturbing our outline, and I would advise that while you're learning that you do that. So you can create as many layers as you need. So if you want to keep all your colours separate until more or less the end, you can do, and then just combine them when you're ready to go. So let's add a new pixel layer. Okay, it's going to have a blank preview, and you can see it says pixel. And this is where you might want to swap over to a graphics tablet. The glove's done and vanishing it, but that's okay because I've got my touch turned off. So that's another point. If you've got a pen and touch tablet, you may want to turn off your touch for this one to save it picking up unnecessary gestures. Okay, so I want to concentrate on this area here. So if we're going down to our magnifying glass, we can just click on that and we can drag that in so that we can see it a bit better. And we can use our hand tool. That's going to move it back across. And we're going to go to our brushes next. So with our brushes, you start to get more of a feel of natural media when we're working in this section of the program. So you can see already in my brushes palette, it's offering me gouaches. And that doesn't mean gouaches as in different colours of gouache. This is different brushes for our gouache. So it's going to behave like we're painting with gouache, but with different brushes. So let's go for I'm just going to rough in some colour. So let's go for this brush here. Now you will find that occasionally it does random things with your pen tip. Don't worry about it. So you can see we have our brush and it's picking up on our direction. So as we go round in a little circle, it's altering the angle because it's reacting to the direction of our brush. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind. Each brush is going to act slightly differently. So you are going to find that some brushes suit your style more than others. and they won't be the same for everyone. Okay, so if you don't feel comfortable with using the gouaches and the brushes that you find in here, you can go through all the different media just by clicking where it says gouache. You can see we've got acrylics, dry media, engraving, inks, and so on and so forth. If you want to do some outlining, inks is a good one. There's a nice little inking brush in there that will help you do some outlining if you want to create your own digital stamp and be really brave. Okay, so for now I'm going to stick to this little brush and I'm just going to rough in some colour. So if we go across to our swatches, we can see that we've got lots of different options for colours. Now, I've just been working on the group, as in the new group, and I've just been doing a bit about swatch books. Oh, excuse me. So these are licensed colours. We usually have a literal swatch book that you can actually purchase. Do follow the storage instructions. They are expensive pieces of kit and you really do need to look after them, and light will affect them. So if you really want to go down the route of getting really accurate colour, then you want to start getting into your colour swatches. So in terms of your Pantones, you also want to get into calibrating your monitor. So at the moment I don't have a calibrated monitor. It's a little bit of a pain, but when I work on the other computer it's fine. But this one's just a little bit more powered up for doing the streaming. Okay, so let's go for Colour Bridge Coated, because we're in that CMYK coated colour space, remember, so you want to choose a Pantone swatch book that matches. And we can see that we've got a whole host of colours that we can choose from. I'm going to go for, let's see, I'm thinking it'd be really nice to kind of inhabit that same colour space that we've got going on in the cover of the new book. So corally, tealy pinks, that sort of area of colour. So let's start off with something fairly pale. So when we're starting to work onto our flowers, what I would suggest is I'm just going to hide that sentiment, because we want that colour to go underneath. Because if we want to move that sentiment around, the worst thing that we could do is paint it all lovely and get it all perfectly shaded, and then we want to move the sentiment and there's a white strip. So just hide it away and forget about it for a minute. And I'm just going to rough in some colour. So I want to go, come on, there we go. So with our gouache you can see it's quite soft. And at the moment our colour line is sitting over the top. So let's say you're a beginner and you just want to make it nice and simple. What you want to do is you want to take this layer and we're going to drag it down to the bottom. And at this point you're going to panic and think you've lost it. No, it's still there, you can see it in the preview. We're going to go to our teacup, and if we go up to where it says normal, we've got our layer blending options. Okay, so you can see we can do it so it lightens everything underneath, so that colour's just going to pop through our outline. But I'm going to go to multiply. So that means that that black line is going to multiply the colour underneath it, so it's going to stay nice and true black. So as we're working with colour, it's going to add a new swatch to our swatch palette. So I'm not going to be too precious about doing this bit, because if need be we can always tidy it up. And you can see I'm not even bothering to get to the ends because we want to do some nice shading effects. Okay, so there's our first flower mapped in, and this flower here is the same as this one, so you could go back in and just do that same colour again. Okay, if you want to slightly adapt this so it starts to look more natural, you can do. And you can see we've got these little leaf shapes here, and I've gone straight over the top. Doesn't hurt. we can always go back in and use the eraser and tidy. If you want to keep your leaves on a separate layer too, that helps, so you're not worrying about colours mixing when you're doing effects like blur and so forth. And again with this one here, you can see that we've got another one. So I will do a bit of tweaking as we get through to doing our shading. And we've got another little bit up here. So by including that little pop up there, just going to tie those colours together. Okay, so at the moment we've got those all on one layer. Now we've got a kind of succulent flower here, so if you want to go greens with that you can do, or you can even go greens fading into the pinks. And we've got a poppy colour and poppy flower here that we can colour. So I'm thinking with poppies it might be nice to go a slightly warmer coral. So if we go back to our colour bridge coated, and we can go to a warmer corally colour. Let's go for that one. So you see when it selects it, right? Okay, so let's try that there. So you can see we've shifted that colour just very slightly. It'd be really nice to include touches of that colour somewhere else. So if we've gone into the centre of our flower here, it might be nice to include that on the tips of these little flowers up here, and we can always blend another colour into those centres. So I'm using a pressure sensitive graphics tablet, so at any point I can turn my pressure on and it can control different things like opacity and the size of your brush, but it can generally only do one thing at once, so be kind to it. Okay, so now that we've done that, I'm going to look at this flower here and I'm going to start a new layer. So we're going to go back to that same pixel layer, and because that layer is already sitting underneath the cup, when we go to a new one it's going to pop it so it's still underneath. I'm going to pop in a little bit of that pink colour. So we're getting there. I'll put a little tiny bit in just some of the places you can just about see, so that when we do our blend it's still going to get a little bit of that pink through. So we've kind of done our first layer of shading, and now it's time to go over to those greens. So let's go down our colour, and want to go more sort of tealy colours, so let's go for something light. So you'll notice I'm sticking to the lighter colours first, and then we can build those up as we need to. So with something like our succulent, where I want the colours to blend in, what I can do that first initial blend and then work my shading on top so that shadows feel a little bit more realistic. Don't get too hung up on having perfect shading though. With an image like this, you're never going to get it exactly perfect or realistic. It's not the type of image for it. So I'm just going to drop that colour in, and it's literally like colouring with a wax crayon at this point, so don't get hung up on getting it perfectly where it needs to go. So I'm going to drop in a bit more of the green there. There's a little bit here. So you notice I'm not bothering with any of the other leaves at this time, because I'm going to drop those onto that separate layer that we said about. So as you start to build up your layers, it's going to get more dense, and then it will hit a wall, or it'll feel like it hits a wall because you can't get any darker. So at this point I'm going to go, right, okay, I've got the colours I want to on that layer. Time to give it a little bit of a blend and a smoosh together. So I'm going to go and give that a blur. So if we go into effects, we can turn on Gaussian blur, and you can see it's got this little setting that says radius. Okay, we can start to move that outside. Now what this is actually doing is it's blending that layer, but it's not. It's holding that information where you've put it, so that if you add any more to that, it's still going to apply that blur. Okay. So for instance, if I come back in here and go, well, actually that needs a little bit more green just in there, I can add that green and it's going to blur it back out, so it's going to look like it's part of that same initial effect. Okay, same way if we start to move a bit darker, so let's go for a slightly darker shade of that green, and we can start to go, okay, I want to put a little bit just in here. Going to pop a bit more in there, definitely in here, because we've got that leaf that's being pushed to the back, or petal, depending on how you look at it, as it's a succulent. And we can pop a bit more in here, and the shading that we do is going to make these layers look a little bit more 3D. So in here I'm going to add a bit more of this darker green just to lift up the petal above it. And the advantage of doing it this way is you can't get too detailed with it because it's got that blur on it, so you don't get hung up with worrying about whether you've got that colour just right. Okay, so I'm quite liking the look of that at the moment, so let's move on to another section. So I'm going to go back to my layer palette. So we have our pixel layer where we did our flowers, and at the moment we've got this lovely texture to it, and it would almost be a shame to knock that back. So whereas our succulent is very smooth, as it would be in life, our flowers tend to have a bit more of a texture to them, and we want that to come across in our shading. So what I would do is, rather than necessarily working back on that same layer, I'm actually going to create another layer above it that I can then do my shading on top. And if at some point I decide that I want to actually bring those two layers together, I can choose to flatten them so that they're merged. Okay, so you're kind of giving yourself the option. Okay, so let's go to a darker shade. So when I'm picking shades, I try and look at the recent colours that I've used up here. And I kind of ignore the black because the black is just kind of annoying and always there sort of thing. Whereas I want to see how this colour fits in with actual colours that we've used. So even though we've got this black outline, I don't need to be thinking about that almost. Okay, so I'm going to take this darker colour and I'm just going to brush it in lightly. So remember how I was saying that your pressure can control lots of different things. So the harder I push, the more opaque that colour is going to be. So I'm going to keep it nice and light, and then I'm just going to blend a little bit down certain petals where I think that they would have a bit extra colour. So this one here where it's sitting down at the bottom, this one just here. There's a little bit more in there, so that can go darker. Maybe even a little bit in there too, knock that one back. And this one here, let's knock that back there. And this. this one just here, I'm just going to put a bit of dark colour actually on this end, like it's almost bent back on itself, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense, because it's that much shorter than the other petals. You want to make it look like it's curving. And same with this one here, although I'm going to keep a highlight on that right hand edge, I'm going to make it look like it's still got that curve to it. So this one, not so much, be quite light. A little bit on the bottom there. So we can do the same for all these flowers. Now in here it's going to be really dark, so don't be afraid to just go for it. Now in your preferences, if you want to, you can change it so that your cursor just reflects the centre point of where your stylus is, or your mouse, if you think that helps you. Everything that I show you, a lot of it is going to be down to personal preference. So you'll find what works best for your style. And don't forget, I've been doing this for donkey's years. So to give you some sort of idea, in terms of the photo retouching, I used to be doing around sort of 80 images a day to a high standard. So a little bit of colouring in isn't exactly a stretch for me. Let's go a little bit darker in the warmer tones. Okay, and then we can do this poppy too while we're here. So I'm just going to drop that in there. And I'm lifting up just so I can get a little bit of shading in. Going to do a little bit just up there, and down here we'd have a bit of shading where it's just curling underneath, and we can even do that just in the centre here. Okay, so let's say you just wanted to blend certain areas of that and tidy up certain areas. So first of all, let's look at tidying up, just because I can see that there's a little bit of colour leakage onto my flowers. So I'm going to go to my eraser. Now your eraser you can treat like any other brush basically, so if you want to use the natural media ones you can do. I'm just going to go in there with just a standard eraser and just tidy up these little bits so that we're not having too much colour leakage. And at any time we can go back and go, well, actually that just needs a little bit of colour just in there, just to make that bit pop. And we can go back to our eraser. Now you can see now why I say if you want to just keep everything on separate layers, it can help. Okay, so next let's say you want to do a little bit of blending with those. If you want to blend between two colours that are on two different layers, you will need to merge them. If you just want to soften one colour, then you can just work on that layer alone. So over here we have these little tools here. So we have a smudge, a blur and a sharpen. So sharpen's where you want something to have a more contrasting change than it currently has. Blur's going to soften it, and smudge is literally going to be like getting your finger and smearing it across wet ink. So you're going to be moving that colour rather than softening it back. So there's times when you want to use both smudge and blur together to kind of pull the colour where you want it to go. So for an example, I'm going to just shrink my brush down a bit. So you can use your keyboard to shrink and enlarge your brush. So that's your 2 square brackets. Left square bracket shrinks it down, right square bracket enlarges it. Or if you have a graphics tablet with shortcut keys, you can actually set your shortcut keys. Now I set mine loads, but what I would say is I then go and always forget what I've set it to. So know your own limitations, and yes, I am actually going to sit down and actually label what I want for each one soon. So we can pull this colour out and you can see it's going to pull it a little bit at a time, so less is more, because we don't want to lose too much of that gouache texture that we've put in, so that it kind of keeps that nice texture. So pull that colour out, and if there's bits that you just want to add a little bit of blur to, we can go to our blur tool, and at the options at the top you can see your width of your brush, so that's where that circle extends to, your opacity, so in this case how strong you want that blur to be, flow. There is a slight difference between opacity and flow. So opacity is a bit like the thinness of your ink, and your flow is how rapidly it puts it down. It's a bit hard to see how it works though when you're working with a graphics tablet if you're not used to using them. So I don't tend to show them too much to beginners. And your hardness is how sharp an edge your brush has. So something like 80 is quite good for doing photo work, where you still want some edge to it in terms of working up against like the edge of a cheek or something like that. You might want to just soften it back, but not too much. But if you want to go soft, you want to go right down to 0, and it won't be quite so obvious straight away where you're working, but it is going to help you get that seamless blend that you're looking for. Okay, so I'm going to apply that on over here. So we're going to start to lose some of that texture. You'll be able to see it's starting to go a bit smoother. It is one of those where it's going to build up gradually. So I'm going to smudge this, well, blur this first, then I'm going to use a little bit of the smudge tool just to pull that bit of that colour where we want it to go. So back to our smudge tool, and let's just pull those colours out from that centre. So you can see, just pulling that down. So I realise this can be quite tricky to see because it's only pulling it a little bit at a time, but you don't want to rush this section. And we're going to pull that colour out there. So now instead of it looking like we've got these red centre splodges and pink on the outside, suddenly you're starting to see the shape of the petal, and we can actually start to form that 3D feel. Okay, so we've done our petals. So now we might want the centres of our stems to start popping. Now because there's no centre to our succulent as such, it doesn't matter that our next layer is going to be underneath that. So another new layer, and this time we're going to work into the centres. So our colour scheme at the moment is very two-tone, so you've got the corals and you've got the greens. Now obviously usually when you look at a flower you tend to get like different shades of greens, but you don't want to push it so far to nature that you lose the colour theme for your card. Okay, so you want to either try and pick a yellow that still fits in that tonal range, or start to think about using something else, like a chocolate would go quite good. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of our peach. So it's kind of heading towards the yellows but without going full on yellow. And press B for brush. And I'm just going to colour that in. So bear in mind that as we do that, it's set to normal, so it's going to block out what's underneath. So we can do the same here. And we're going to do the same here. Now with that one you're going to see that there's a little colour leakage onto our other flower just because of how big our brush is. don't worry about that at the moment. We can come back and we can tidy that up. I'm also going to put a little bit just here onto that poppy there. It's just going to make it look that where that petal's curled up is obviously a curl. Okay, and into the centre of our poppy, and we can even do the same for these little round bits at the top. So go light to start with and then deepen it down towards that bottom, and you're going to make it feel like it's an actual round physical object. Okay, and we can do the same. So don't get hung up again on worrying about whether it's tidy. It's just about getting that form in, and then we can tidy it up afterwards. So now if we press E, we can go back to our razor and we can go, right, okay, I don't want it in that petal there. Let's take that out. Okay, there's a little bit that's going onto our cup just there. We could leave that because the colours would reflect to a certain extent, but I'm going to do it just so it looks nice and tidy. And I'm just going to take that bit from in that succulent there, so that we're keeping that colour consistent. So we're nearly there. We've just got our leaves to do and a little bit of detail for our cup, and then we can look at it as a whole and see where we want to actually increase our shading. So I'm going to probably stop talking for a bit now, and the next bit should be a bit speeded up. Okay. Okay, so I've mapped in most of the colour for my leaves, and I want to make these look a bit smoother. So again, I'm going to go to Effects. I'm going to take up that blur a little bit, and you want to check how much you go before it starts to get too smooth, and so like if we go up there you can see it's really not right. So I want to bring it so it's sort of there-ish. And if at this point you're thinking, okay, well I've gone out the lines and whatever and I want to tidy that up, I'm going to show you a little trick. So with your layer selected, down the bottom here you've got a little square with a circle in. That says mask layer. If we press that, it's going to add a mask. So what that means is we're now editing like a frame around the outside. So we're not actually removing colour now, we're going to actually be masking it and hiding it away. So with masks, usually they are created in white and black. So I want to make sure that that mask is selected and that I'm working on it. Okay, and if we start to draw that in, you can see that we get a preview. So I'm going to just zoom in a bit more. If I press and hold space, I can navigate around. I can just tidy this bit up. So that means that no matter how much then I blur the colour, it's going to hide whatever it does to pull that colour out. So this is useful for wherever you want to keep colour contained to a certain area. I wouldn't recommend doing this for every single section though. The reason being that you could actually spend more time masking it than you actually want to. So I'm going to also mask around the inside of these petals as well, so they don't get smudged. And I can do the same in there, and here. Okay. And we can go in there, and there. There's a little bit on that petal there, so we could do coming back and just sorting out that colour. Mask that around there, take that out of that petal. Same with these petals here. Okay, and if you want to take some of this pink out, then you can do the same technique on those pink flowers too. So with those masks now, we can go back to our main pixel layer, and if we want to drop in an extra bit of colour, we can do. So I'm just going to use my mouse just to make sure that I get the right layer. Don't worry about naming them. So if I cycle through my colours, we had something that was kind of tealy before. Let's go really quite dark. Let's even go right dark. Press B for brush, and I can just do a little bit in there and just make these start to pop a little bit more so they don't look like they've got white halo around. So I'm just going to take those up the centre, a little bit up that leaf there, drop a little bit in there, a little bit in there, a little bit up there. So remember that blur is working live all the time, just seeing what you're doing and how it's going to affect it. So a little bit in down here, a little bit under that section. So you can see we're starting to lift out those succulent petals from the leaf, and then we can even start to just introduce a little extra shading where we know it's going to be a little bit darker. So if we go on this edge here, and we can still go back and edit our mask at any point, and if we find that we've erased something we don't need to. So it's not like you can't constantly tweak what you're doing, so don't panic about going wrong. There's nothing where you can go wrong here. everything is undoable. So I'm going to go back to my mask. And I can erase that back out. Just so we keep a nice, neat edge. So obviously the neater this edge will be, the less you're going to need to necessarily use printing cut. So if you're not confident with tracing yet, make sure you keep a nice white edge and your machine should be able to do it for you. So we're almost there. There's a few leaves and things that we just need to bring in. So let's go back to this one. And I'm going to pick a slightly different green, so something a bit warmer. It's good to get some slight variance in your tones so that as you're working, excuse that, don't need to know. And we've got our other little leaves just down here, and we can pop that colour in there too. So again, we can go back in and just mask those just because they're that little bit fiddly. So other ways that you can colour if you're not confident with drawing just yet, like this, is you can use your gradient fills. So if you have the new book, I talk about using gradients not only to colour, but you can use them for shading, for varying opacity, which is really good if you want to do like shadow work and things like that. There's a little bit I've missed, so I'm just going to go back to my brush, add that bit back in. There's obviously a little bit just there where my mask isn't quite right. Let's see what's going on. So if we press X, it's still going to be dense. Okay. Usually it's going to swap between the two. So if I hit B for brush, let's pop that back in because I want some of that colour. There we go. And then we can take it back out around the edges. So we've got a nice neat finish. And we're there. So we have leaves, and I just need to do my stems then. So I'm going to go back onto my flower layer to do this. And the reason I'm doing that is I want something where it's going to have a nice sharp edge to it. And let's go to inks. And I'm going to go to my brushes. Let's go for, actually let's not go inks, let's go pens. I've got nice, let's go for this one. So it's got a little bit of a texture to the outside. And I'm going to go to a deep version of our corally colour. And by doing that, we're going to try and keep those colours consistent. So there we go. So because we've got that texture on the outside of the brush, you're never going to get a perfect. There we go. Now bear in mind your lighter colours on the layer above, so you're not going to colour over the top of it as such. Okay, so there's another little bit that comes around there. So you can use that same brush. And we can even use the same for the little stems just down here too. Considering the touch isn't turned on, it's trying to be far too clever. So I'm just adding a light touch of that in there so that we don't go outside the lines too much. So I would recommend colouring before trying to do the cut path, just in case you do end up changing anything and going, okay, well that needs to go around there. I just notice there's a little bit that just needs a little bit of tweak on the mask for the leaf layer, so I can just come in there and go around there. So as I said, if you're going to do a cut path, it's not quite so important that you do this step where we're tidying round. But I like to do it just so that it feels finished. And if you cut it for whatever reason it doesn't quite align, you haven't got kind of ghost of the film. Okay, so those are our flowers. Now we just want to do our cup. So again, I'm going to go up to my top layer, new pixel layer, and then we can start to shade this in. So you're working onto a totally white background with a black line. So that means we can start to get a little bit lazy if you want to. Now, what I would say is make sure that your lines do meet at the end, otherwise when you do this, it's going to bleed through to other areas. So it will depend on the image that you choose, but I'm just going to make my life a little bit easier and try and use a paint bucket. So you can see up at the top it's got a tolerance. So that means how much leeway you're going to give it before it runs up to that edge and goes no more. So if we do that, you can see straight away it's going to go all over that layer. And that's because we've got our source as our current layer. So it's going to totally ignore anything else now. We can change this. And we can go current layer and below. Well, that's all very well, but if we do that, you're going to get the same effect. So this is one of those ones where your layer ordering can change depending on the tool that you're using. So we want to be able to use this outline. So that means for this bit, we're going to pop it above. Now we're not going to leave it there, because if we were to do that, we'd get this really harsh line. And that isn't what we want. We want that nice black line to sit above it. So although I will be filling that space, excuse me, I will be dropping that down a layer. Next decision you need to make is what colour. Okay, so at the moment we've got lots of the warmer corally colours and the greeny colours up against that cup, but not very much of the pink. It only really touches in a few small areas. So therefore it might be a good idea that we try that pink out as an idea. So you can actually go in here, let's add a few of these to our palette so that we have them to play with. So usually by this point, I've done this before, it's a good habit to get into. So we've got lots of different colours that we can use to create our layers. Okay, so these we've got, and and that's our dark colour. So it's unlikely that we'd use our darkest colour as part of our cup, but we might want to do it in like the base of our saucer or something to give it that kind of 3D edge. Okay, but I really want that pink. Oh, naughty computer's going to get told off in a minute. So if we press I for eyedropper, we can pick up any colour off our artboard so that we can then use that. So you can see our first colour we've already set up as a new swatch. So that's that one already done. But what we haven't got is that darker pink. So if we go where we can see it's darkest but hasn't got any black lines on it, because this is kind of important as well. When you're using your eyedropper, it actually takes it from the display and not from the document itself. So if you have any colour issues or anything, you really do need to try and make sure that you do have everything calibrated, at least to some basic level. So most graphic cards include some sort of basic calibration. So perform that and go from there. Also, some screens have a profile built in. So for the one screen I'm working with, it has a profile built in that it's currently using, and it's as close as it's going to get. So we'll go from there. So with our eyedropper, you can see it's got 0.1 by 1, so that means at that point that's the colour, and we can add that to the palette too. So even though you're thinking, oh, your palette now looks a mess, whatever, don't worry about it, because it's better to have more individual shades of your colour than not being able to get back to one that you like. So let's go to that one, back to our paint bucket. So now that our pixel layer is above our outline, we can drop it in, and if it's good, it's going to just pop it into that section there. So this is where we can start to become really, really lazy. Okay, so by applying a flat colour, then all we have to do is just shade over the top when we're done. So your cup might not just be two colours, it might be that each of those wider stripes is a different colour. So let's go for our kind of orangey tone, and we can drop that in there. And you want to do all the little bits. Now bear in mind, because it's the layer and below, if there's any bits where it's leaked, you may not necessarily be able to get it to do a nice clean fill. So for instance, if I zoom in on that bit I've just done, you can see it's just got that area there, and that's back to this tolerance. So you can see my tolerance at the moment is 1%. So if we start to increase that tolerance, you can see then knocks it out. So I'm not too worried about the texture in this bit, but I will clean up a little bit around there in a bit. So there's our kind of centre band. So now I'm going to go to let's go to the light green. And we're going to go drop that in there. But if you look, you can see that there's a slight halo. And our cut comes down here, so this bit in here is going to have that same colour dropped in. Even drop a little bit in that section there if you want to. Okay, so we've got our 3 bands in. Now, if we were to do our shading at this point, it would do a fantastic job of shading those 3 colour bands, but then you're not going to have any shading in your centre stripe bits, which you may want to go for, but on the other hand you may not. So this is going to be one of those occasions where I'm going to paint bucket with white, and it's not going to make a lot of sense as to what I'm doing. In actual fact, just so you can see it a bit better, I'll do it with the same orangey colour, but I'm going to take my opacity down. So if I go, there we go, and I'm going to take that opacity down to about 33, so hopefully you'll be able to see something. So I'm going to drop that in there. You can see that colour's dropping in. And then there's little bits in there, but you're not really going to see them that much. It's more at your edges you want to pay attention. And we can do the same to our handle. Now you can see here that we're getting lots of white speckles, so if you want to undo that, and we can sort out that tolerance again. So take it up full, there we go. So it just looks that little bit neater. And we can even redo those bands if we want to, just so look a bit better. There we go. I'll even put a bit more in there. And we can pop that same colour in there. So now our cup is starting to look more like a cup. And I'll even do the same down here. So I'm doing me twice so it's up to that same level. And I'm going to go back to my green. And it feels like it. There we go. Make sure that you put your opacity back up to 100, and then we can fill in that space. So in there. Now if you've got something like this here where it doesn't make a lot of sense, this line, don't worry about it, you can just go in and sort of my computer's a bit naughty on occasion, so bear with it. And we'll just pop that colour in to there, if it behave. So again, just because we changed tool, it's forgotten what we want, so we can pop that. Come on, behave. It doesn't want to do this today, does it? Sometimes you just have to get your mouse in there and just let it go. So again, there's a little bit in there, and I'll come back and sort that when I can zoom in a bit more. So let's zoom. Now if we fill that in there, you can see that because that black line's missing, it's going to try and go elsewhere. So even if we get it in the perfect place, it's not quite going to work. So we can leave that one. Okay, so a little bit in there. I can drop a bit in there so that it starts to look a bit darker in there. And there's a little bit hiding at the back there. So there's our cup, and now we might want to add some shading to that. So I wanted to show you a bit of a cheat way of adding shading. So rather than you having to worry about individual colours, what we can do is we can use the burn tool. So it looks like a little bunch of flames, and we'll use this usually when we're retouching photos and things, so trying to take out where things have been overexposed, for instance. So usually we use this in really small amounts. So you don't want to go mad, you are better off going slower and building up that tone gradually. So you can see our opacity is at 25, our hardness is at 0 because we want that blend to be nice and smooth. And also tonal range, so highlights, because we're working with pale colours, we need to apply it to highlights. If you're only working with darker colours, you can stick to shadows and it will still apply. If we were to put shadows on highlights, it just wouldn't look right. So we're going to go nice and soft, gentle, and we're going to bend the edges of this cup. Okay. The other thing is you want a nice big brush. So you can see I'm going to go really big. You also have a little button here that says protect hue. So you can see if you untick it's going to go quite grey. If you do that, it's not quite so bad. Now, when you're working with some programs, what you'll find is you do get a better burn. So burning isn't just about adding black, it's about deepening that colour too. Okay, so just bear that in mind, which is why we say you want to keep it low and then build that colour gradually. So in actual fact, I'm going to even lower that pasty more because I don't want to be so grey in that first pass. It's just going to be quite soft. Then as we move across that surface, you're going to go half and half and half. So think like a nuclear half-life. So as you get to that edge, it's going to get darker and darker and darker. And the size of your brush is going to get finer and finer and finer. Okay, so we're going to take our brush and we're going to brush it down and out. So we're following that outside line. We're going to do the same this side, so down and out. Now bear in mind when we're doing this, all this is applying to are those colours that we've put in the cup. So it's ignoring anything that we put in the flowers. So this is why it's so easy to shade this way. So again, half again and half again. Now bear in mind that as we start to get across this side, obviously we've got that handle that we've got to be concerned about. So this is why you're going to then shrink your brush. So we're going to go again and again. Now if you want to put a bit in here so that it starts to colour the sections that we've popped in around the saucer, you can do. What I would say is you can also use this tool towards the end to actually do like a shadow layer over the top, so don't get too hung up on getting it perfect first time. So now I'm just going to go down that outside and we can pop a little bit around these flowers in here and a bit more there. And we can get quite dark if we want to. Now, you might decide at this point, okay, I want something that's going to make it look like that cup is shiny. So I'm going to go back in with a big version of that brush. And I'm going to swipe once. Okay, so that we're giving something for the next bit to play off. So we've done our burn, which is great for adding our shadows. Excuse me. But now we need to go the other way and add the highlights. So we have our dodge tool. So again, this is going back to our photography, and when we used to be developing negatives, burn would have a little hole in it so that we're burning our areas that were too overexposed. Dodge is going to stop the light getting that photographic paper so that it doesn't get as much light or burn as deep. So we can start to use that to highlight. So if I bring this right down, and again I want to make sure that we're set it to highlights because otherwise it's not going to be where we need it to be. We can start to actually lift out areas of colour. Now I'm just going to do this gradually, and you can see that we're lifting out a little highlight. I'm going to go for a wider brush. Okay, and it's being naughty again, so I'm just going to do a little swipe just there. I'm going to shrink down my brush, and we can even at this point alter that hardness so it's going to go up to something a bit sharp on the edge so that we can get a real feel of the shine of that cup. So you can see straight away we've got a real defined highlight. We can go smaller still, and we can start to put in a bit of detail if we want to. So we start to feel that we've got that highlighted that cup as it's going down the side. Now, this is where we can get really, really good. And if we zoom in and we shrink our brush down enough, we can even start to give a feel of this having a rim. Now, what I would say is here, if you turn your touch control on, we can actually rotate the paper. So if you're finding you can't get to that angle to where you can comfortably draw it, we can actually rotate it around so that we do that. Okay, so I'll do that again, just because I had that little double dot and I don't want that. We can just take that around that edge. So that's going to give us a little bit of a feel of highlight, shrink it down again. And we can actually add a bit of detail just to that edge there. So our hand makeup is now going to have a little bit of a highlight to it. So you've got your paper rotated like this, and now you're like, that's great, but if I go and try and rotate it, I'm never going to get back straight again. That's okay. Go to view, reset rotation, and you're back to normal. So that's one of the reasons why I do like using my graphics tablet, because you can get in and you can edit things, and the more time you have, the more you can kind of get into that zen-like calm of doing it, so that we can actually start to pull out areas. So I'm just doing a little bit just on that top edge. So now we need to actually put something in our cup. Okay, so we've done our nice shading on our cup, and our cup now looks like it's got, I don't know, something solid and white in it. I mean, you can't even say it looks like milk, because milk just doesn't look like that. So I'm going to take that layer, I'm going to drop it down. Now you'll see I'm dragging that over to the right hand side, so that that blue line now lines up to that left hand edge, because we don't want to drop it inside. We want to drop it so that it is ready to go on that side. Okay. So I'm thinking tea. Nice tea colour. Now, my idea of tea colour and everybody else's idea of tea colour just never seem to be the same thing. My tea is like me, very anemic but awfully sweet. Okay, so I'm going to pop in another pixel there, and I'm going to drop that underneath my cup. Just because I can just then go, right, okay, that's going to go in there, and it's going to be hiding anything that I do wrong. I'm going to start off with my peachy colour. And I'm just going to brush that in. So let's increase my brush size a bit. Oh, yeah, a lot more than that. There we go. So you can see the difference between the brushes. So I'm still in that inky one, so let's go back to my gouache. Just because I can. And let's try this one. There we go. Come on. Yeah, now you want to. Okay, doesn't look like that one. There we go. So I'm just going to colour in that space. And it's not too bad for a kind of tea colour, I suppose. And I don't even mind it's got that squiggle in. Now just be aware on that top edge, our creamy colour, if you remember, had an opacity to it. So it's still going to see through to that layer, so we may need to still apply a mask. So I'm going to use my darker colour, and all I'm going to do is lighten my opacity and my flow, so that it's going to be a bare tint of it. So I'm not looking at getting that full on colour, I just want to use it to kind of shade what's already there. So let's go to our opacity, I'm going to knock that right down. So what I love about Affinity Design is it actually previews what that brush is going to do, so you can see how subtle that colour is going to be. So my tea is getting a little bit more normal people's tea rather than mine. And I might even put a little bit of a highlight in it in a minute, but I quite like how that's going. Okay, so if we wanted to at this point, we could still go in and do our normal eraser or our mask. The choice is yours. Just for speed, I'm just going to go in and just take that area. So on this lower edge, doesn't matter because that colour was solid anyway before we started doing all the tinting and shading to it. So I'm quite happy with that now. We have a tea. But you may be looking at that burning that we did and thinking, actually it just looks a bit flat and a bit, yeah. So a few of the other ways around it is, instead of doing it how I've done it, is if you apply your burn on a separate layer, or if you want to do it with a brush, then you can always use colour and other blending, layer blending options to just deepen that colour a little bit. But it does make the flowers stand out a bit more, so it's all down to personal preference. Okay, so let's go back to my teacup and let's show you another way. So I'm going to drop a layer on top, and I'm just going to literally just try and help out that shading a little bit. So this isn't about redoing what's already there, it's just tinting it. So again, we're going to go to our brush, we're going to keep it low. We're going to just apply it over the top. Okay, so if at this point you're thinking, okay, that's a bit too pale, then we can start to go a bit darker. So let's try that. So because it's going to build up nice and slowly, we can start to maybe add a little bit more. Yeah, that's more like it. And I want to make it nice and soft. Soft. And big. Bigger the better. Because then so I'm just going to do a little bit of texture just there, and a little bit on this edge. So at the moment our layer is set to normal, so we can set it to colour burn, linear burn, darker colour. So that's going to deepen what's already underneath, or multiply. And you're looking for the one that's not going to, I think I'm going to go for that one, you know. Quite like that. And again, because we can, I'm just going to blur that slightly so it's not quite so. There we go. And we can use a mask in the same way. So let's go to our eraser. Yep, we want a totally hard edge, and I want to go so that we actually take that area out of there. We can actually take it entirely out of that section there. And underneath here too. Hasn't really affected the flowers that much, so it's just that bit. There we go. Doesn't take a lot to tidy it up. So there's our teacup. And I was just going to add a little bit more of that red in just to that poppy, wasn't I? So we can go back to our poppy layer. Before it's gone. And I'm just going to add in a bit more of that red. You can always add more in that way. Let's just take that down a bit. Put up the opacity. Let's go in there. Just add it in there. There we go. So now with that done, we can go back and turn on our sentiment, make sure that we're happy with that. If we want to do any effects to help that pop out, we can do. So for instance, I'm thinking an outer glow might be good because it starts to get a little bit lost. So with your outer glow, you obviously don't want it to be black because otherwise what would the point be? So the more we increase that, you can see it's spreading out from behind. So it's going to make it pop out a little bit better. We can also add an outline, so if it's really struggling, we can pop an outline in that's going to help it out a little bit. Like so. I'm just going to make that white because he still has a little bit of that background. So if we go where it says swatches, and we're going to go to CMYK, and we want it to have no black. Okay, and we can do the same for our glow too if we want. And we can boost that up. Let's take that out actually now that we've got our. So there's our sentiment, and if we want to move that around we can do. So if we go back to our vector persona, we can see that we have our sentiment, and we can rotate that, and now we haven't got to worry about what we've coloured underneath. So I'm just going to pull that in just a little bit so it sits within that edge. And if you've got anything weird going on with your outline, chances are it means that there's something that was hiding on that pixel there. So there's a little bit just there that is not quite right. So I'm going to go back to the pixel. So you can easily go between the two layers to get it how you want it. Okay, and there we go. So now you would apply your registration layers as usual and trace your cut. So there's a little bit on digital colouring for you. Thank you for watching and see you later. Bye.